Hello, everyone. Welcome to Last to the Mast. This video will be an introduction to an economic system known as Distributism, which was formulated by Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton to English Catholics in the early 20th century. Before I begin, I'd like to apologize for the audio quality. I didn't get my microphone to work, so I'm just rolling with the webcam audio. So up on the top, other way, top left, you see words, definition of capitalism. There will be different phases to this introduction, and within those different groups, there are going to be subtopics. So the subtopic is up on the top left for you, just so you can see that and internalize it. I like to try to keep this short. So maybe around 20 to 30 minutes, but we'll see how that goes. All right, so first, an introduction to G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc. Oh, by the way, I read 4 books for this that are kind of central to the distributist framework, and G.K. Chesterton wrote 3 of them. Hilaire Belloc wrote 1 of them. So I'm just going to introduce Chesterton and Belloc, and then move on with examining what they actually said. All right, so G.K. Chesterton, born in 1874, died in 1936 at the age of 62. He wrote many books. One of my favorite authors, if not my favorite, wrote the Father Brown series, best detective series of all time, even better than Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie. But he wrote a lot of very Catholic stuff in the early 20th century, but he didn't actually convert until 1922. And then his wife converted 4 years later in 1926. Fun fact, I think either Chesterton wrote an intro for one of Fulton Sheen's books, or Fulton Sheen wrote an intro for one of G.K. Chesterton's books. Fulton Sheen really loved G.K. Chesterton, and so they actually met, I would assume. And yeah, so that's pretty cool. G.K. Chesterton was actually nominated for a Nobel Prize in Literature in 1935. I did not know that. So yeah, he was a pretty interesting guy. Then we move on to Hilaire Belloc, born in 1870, 4 years older than G.K. Chesterton, died in 1953 at the age of 83. He was actually born in France to a French father and an English mother. Grew up in poverty in England. There's this crazy story, you can look it up on Wikipedia or whatever, where this girl that he wanted to marry, her mom wanted her to be a nun, and Belloc really wanted to marry her, so her mom kept moving her away from Belloc. And I think they moved all the way up to Los Angeles or something crazy. And Belloc, unassisted, without any money, went from Britain to Los Angeles to pursue this woman. And eventually her mom died, and she decided to marry him. So I thought that story was pretty cool. So after he did all that, or after at least after he went to America, he probably married her after he went to college, but he graduated Oxford in 1895 with honors in history. So he's a very good historian. Actually wrote several books that I've read myself, one on the Reformation, one on the Crusades. Definitely would recommend both of those. All right, so let's jump in to what distributism is. All right, so for the first, group, or first component or tenet of distributism is anti-capitalism. There are kind of 2 others, well, 3 or 4 others. There's anti-capitalism, that's number 1. So Chesterton and Belloc very against the capitalist system that was in England at the time. Number 2, there's this idea of the servile state, which we'll get into later. Number 3, there's this idea of redistributism, which is their solution to the problem of capitalism. And then number 4, I sort of put in a short section on their affinity for the French Revolution, which I thought was interesting. And then 5, there's their sort of utopian ideal of what a society would look like after redistributism. And I entitled that 3 Acres and a Cow, after Chesterton's famous quote. And then I'll conclude. So I might have to break this introduction up into 2 parts. We'll see about that. Maybe hit anti-capitalism and servile state in the first part, and then redistributism, the French their affinity for the French Revolution, and Three Acres in the Calendar. Second, but we'll see how it goes. All right. So anti-capitalism. First, what is their definition of capitalism? Well, Belloc and Chesterton both have differing um, sort of definitions. But I should also mention, I forgot to mention this in the introduction, the three books that Chesterton wrote. First one was, what was it? What's Wrong with the World in 1910. Then Hilaire Belloc wrote The Servile State in 1912, 2 years after that. Then Chesterton wrote Utopia of the Users in 1917. And then he wrote The Outline of Sanity in 1927. So those are the four books that I'm kind of going to be pulling from to look at what they actually believed. All right. So anti-capitalism, the definition of capitalism. Belloc's in 1912, his definition of capitalism was the two marks then defining the capitalist state are one, that the citizens thereof are politically free, i.e., can use or withhold at will their possessions or their labor, but are also two, divided into capitalist and proletarian in such proportions that the state as a whole is not characterized by the institution of ownership among free citizens, but by the restriction of ownership to a section markedly less than the whole, or even to a small minority. Such a capitalist state is essentially divided into two classes of free citizens, the one capitalist or owning, the other propertyless or proletarian. Page 16, Servile State. That's if you guys want the edition, I don't know. I have this book that I kind of use, so not sure what other editions would have, but anyway, so this definition you can see there are two components to it. One, there's political freedom, meaning people have free speech, they can pursue their own interests, but two, um, the ownership of the means of production is centralized in the hands of the few, meaning that there is not as much freedom with regard to property. So freedom politically, not as much freedom in terms of property because it's concentrated in the hands of few people. That's the essence of the Belloc's definition of capitalism. All right, and then turning to Chesterton, this is his definition. When I say capitalism, I commonly mean something that may be stated thus: that economic condition in which there is a class of capitalists, roughly recognizable and relatively small, in whose possession so much of the capital is concentrated as to necessitate a very large majority of the citizens serving those capitalists for a wage. But this is undoubtedly a very bad word because it is used by other people to mean quite different things. Yeah, that's kind of one of the problems that they're facing is capitalism is defined in so many different ways by so many different people. It's kind of hard to pin down exactly what it means objectively. But for Chesterton, we can see that his definition is very similar to, and this is page 60, Outline of Sanity, by the way. His definition is very similar to Belloc's in that there's a small class of capitalists who own the means of production, but Chesterton adds in this component of the majority of the citizens serving those capitalists for a wage. So he doesn't really acknowledge the political freedom that capitalism has as much as Belloc does. It kind of looks like like the fact that you have to choose between working for a capitalist and starving to death, for Chesterton kind of means that you're kind of compelled you're compelled to work basically, to a certain extent for the people who have the means of production, which is a small class of people. So yeah, it's a little different, but pretty similar as they go. All right, so let's go on to capitalism as a necessity. So remember, we're still talking about the overall, giving you a sense of the overall picture. We're still talking about Belloc and Chesterton's anti-capitalism. And one of their critiques is that, or mainly Chesterton's critique, is capitalism is kind of foisted upon people rather than actually chosen as the economic system of choice. And then here's what he says: my main contention is that, whether necessary or not, both the industrialism and collectivism have been accepted as necessities, not as naked ideals or desires. Page 60, What's Wrong with the World? That was the one published in 1910. And he goes on to say, or he also says in that same book, page 52, one has come to defending indefensible slums and still more indefensible slum landlords, while the other has come to treating as divine the sheds and pipes, which he only meant as desperate. Such is the lamentable history of Hudge and Gudge, which I merely introduce as a type of an endless and exasperating misunderstanding which is always occurring in modern England. To get men out of a rookery, men are put into a tenement, and at the beginning, the healthy human soul flows them both. So Hudge and Gudge are kind of his two. Uh, One, I forget which is which, but one of them is sort of like the capitalist, um, kind of exploiting the workers and kind of forcing them into rookeries, and then the other is the socialist who constructs like just similar shabby um, uh, slums and forces men out of their rookery into their tenement. And one of his critiques later on, I'm just remembering this. One of his critiques of that is that in the rookery, at least they had some land or maybe a cow or something like that, and then they were forced from that into like an apartment kind of deal where they didn't have that anymore, no property. And yeah, so sort of he gives a very illustrative metaphor for this, which I think is pretty cool. So, quote, suppose I go onto a ship, and the ship sinks almost immediately, but I, by reason of my clinging to a mast, upon a desert island am eventually cast. Or rather, suppose I am not cast on it, but am kept bobbing about in the water, because the only man on the island is what some call an individualist, and will not throw me a rope, though coils of rope of the most annoying elaboration and neatness are conspicuous beside him as he stands upon the shore. Now, it seems to me that if, in my efforts to shout at this fellow creature across the crashing breakers, I call this position the insurrealistic position, and my position the semi-amphibian position, much valuable time may be lost. I'm not an amphibian. I'm a drowning man. He is not an insularist or an individualist. He is a beast. Or rather, he is worse than any beast can be. And if instead of letting me drown, he makes me promise, while I'm drowning, that if I come on shore it shall be as his bodily slave, having no human claims henceforward forever, then, by the whole theory and practice of capitalism, he becomes a capitalist. He also becomes a cad. Poetry of the Revolution in Utopia Visors, 1917. Um, yeah, so this again goes back to the first quote that I mentioned in this section, saying that capitalism is foisted upon people. People don't want to work for capitalists. They want to own property, and we'll get into that later. They want to own means of production. But because those property and means of production are in the hands of the few capitalists, the mass of people are going to starve if they don't serve the capitalists. And so they consent to serve the capitalists for a wage, just as the drowning man consents to be the bodily slave of the person who throws in the coil of rope. Okay, so you can see G.K. Chesterton kind of hitting capitalism pretty hard here. All right, so let's move on to the next subsection within this sort of anti-capitalist framework or anti-capitalist theme throughout their work. Capitalism as a contradiction. Okay, this is a very interesting one. So I'll quote this and then I'll explain it after I quote it. So this is from the Outline of Sanity, pages 32 to 33, written in 1927, G.K. Chesterton. Capitalism is a contradiction. It is even a contradiction in terms. Capitalism is contradictory as soon as it is complete, because it is dealing with the mass of men in two opposite ways at once. When most men are wage earners, it is more and more difficult for most men to be customers, for the capitalist is always trying to cut down what his servant demands, and in doing so, is cutting down what his customer can spend. He is wanting the same man to be rich and poor at the same time. As soon as the wealthy as a whole are employing the wage earners as a whole, this contradiction stares them in the face. Now, in proportion as capitalism covers the whole earth, links up large populations, and is ruled by centralized systems, the nearer and nearer approaches this resemblance to the lonely figures on the remote island. Remember that island analogy that we just looked at. If the trade with the natives is really going down, so as to necessitate the wages of the natives also going down, we can only say that the case is rather more tragic if the excuse is true than if it is false. We can only say that Crusoe is now indeed alone, and that Friday is unquestionably unlucky. This is a great, very insightful point, I think, by G.K. Chesterton. And I'm not critiquing distributism. I'm just trying to lay it out for you objectively. This is as what it is. I'm not trying to say whether it's good or bad. I'll do that in a separate video. But I think this is a very insightful thing that he's saying. if you want to, the whole goal of capitalism is the invisible hand, right? Everyone acting for their own good um, causes economic productivity, as if an invisible hand of this is Adam Smith's terms, as if an invisible hand was guiding things in the process. Um, so if the profit motive of firms is to sell their produce to customers, then they need customers to buy it. And if the customers are the people that they're paying to make this stuff, then those people, they need to ensure that those people have enough to be able to buy the things that they're producing. So if you imagine like a closed economy of like 20 people, and one of them is the two of them are the capitalists, and the other 18 are working for them. Well, if they're selling like apples, and let's say apples is the only good in the economy, and the price of apples is 10 bucks, $10 for an apple, and the wage that they're paying the other 18 is like $5. Well, if they're paying the workers in period one only $5, they're not going to be able to afford the produce at $10. And because it's a closed economy, these 20 people are the only people in that economy. So the the capitalist goes bankrupt because he can't sell his produce to his own people because he's paying them too little to be able to buy apples. Assuming closed economy, only good in the economy. So he needs to pay them at least 10 in order to incentivize them to be able to in order for the wage earners to even be able to buy an apple. So this is really insightful, I think, because um, capitalism. If we look at the Industrial Revolution of, say, like England and even America, um, I'm just remembering all the Dickens stories that I've read. It's parasitical upon its own population, according to G.K. Chesterton, and you can kind of see this historically. Um, One solution to this problem is to um, pay the like pay minimum wage of like $10 to the least productive workers, and then pay like 20 or something the to the to like more productive workers, and then the less productive workers then like are living on poverty from paycheck to paycheck basically because they're just barely able to afford the living that they're making, whereas the other class sort of is able to um, have a little bit extra put by. So the capitalists could do that and sort of create a middle class that is content with what is going on because they themselves are not living paycheck to paycheck. And the capitalist is able by sort of oppressing the lower income wage earners or lower productivity workers, the capitalist is still able to make good profits. Um, so in England, you in the Industrial Revolution, you sort of see this in the slums. Like they're just barely able to afford anything. They're stealing. Uh, remember Fagin's gang, like stealing from people just be able to survive. Well, this can be extended beyond the country because countries are not closed economies. So if a capitalist country owns another country, they can create a middle class in their own country, and then that poverty, the class that is in poverty, would be the class in the other countries. And so it would create this illusion, sort of, that capitalism is um, beneficial for the country because no one in that country is really suffering that much. But in reality, it's parasitical upon the laborers in the other countries that are having to accept extremely low wages, capitalism as a necessity, as we just talked about, and G.K. Chesterton, they're having to accept capitalism as a necessity. Either you work for like bare subsistence or you die. Um, and so it's sort of the capitalist system sort of extends out and keeps growing and growing and growing into other countries, and but that can create an illusion of prosperity in one country. And I think you sort of see this today with the sweatshops of Nike and other companies, just or Facebook, like paying just unbelievably low sums of money to people in foreign countries because those people in foreign countries are willing to work for that wage. And then we in America, because we have a strong, because all of the capital is here, and we have a strong middle class, like we benefit from it, and we don't notice the potential injustice or downside to capitalism in our own country. So I think this is really an insightful point by Chesterton. Sorry, I sort of rambled a little bit there, but hopefully you get the point. That's basically the point that Chesterton's making here, and I just want to develop that a little bit to help you guys understand. Not necessarily saying that I agree or disagree, but we'll save that for the next video. All right, so capitalism is contradiction. The next subtopic here is capitalism opposes the ideal. This is Hudge and Gudge. Yeah. So basically, I'll just read it and then I'll explain it. Oh, this is epic. Yeah, I'm just gonna read all of this. I don't care. Screw the time. I know it's been 20 minutes, but this is just an epic passage. I'm just gonna be reading what he says for a little bit here. Under the pressure of certain upper class philosophies, or in other words, under the pressure of Hudge and Gudge, the average man has really become bewildered about the goal of his efforts, and his efforts therefore grow feebler and feebler. His simple notion of having a house of his own is derided as bourgeoisie, as sentimental or despicably Christian. Under various verbal forms, he is recommended to go on the streets, which is called individualism, or to the workhouse, which is called collectivism. But it may be said here that Hudge and Gudge, or the governing class generally, will never fail for lack of some modern phrase to cover their ancient predominance. The great lords will refuse the English peasant his 3 acres and a cow on advanced grounds if they cannot refuse it longer on reactionary grounds. They will deny him the 3 acres on the grounds of state ownership. They will forbid him the cow on the grounds of humanitarianism. Pages 53 to 54, What's Wrong with the World. So Hudge and Gudge, sort of the capitalist and socialist, going at it here. And you can see Chesterton's famous phrase, 3 acres and a cow, which we'll get to later. That's where it comes from. All right, and then sort of the point of his whole book was of What's Wrong with the World, written in 1910. I'm just going to read this through. It's just epic rhetoric, even if you don't agree with it, which I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but you just can't help marveling at how he puts things. Chesterton, What's Wrong with the World. The whole of this book has been a rambling and elaborate urging of one purely ethical fact, and if by any chance it should happen that there are still some who do not quite see what that point is, I will end with one plain parable, which is none the worse for being also a fact. A little while ago, certain doctors and other persons sent out an order that all little girls should have their hair cut short. I mean, of course, all little girls whose parents were poor. Now, the case for this particular interference was this, that poor people must not be allowed to have hair, because in their case it must mean lice in the hair. Therefore, the doctors proposed to abolish the hair. It never seems to have occurred to them to abolish the lice, yet it could be done. It never seems to strike these people that the lesson of lice in the slums is the wrongness of slums, not the wrongness of hair. Now, the whole parable and purpose of these last pages, and indeed of all these pages, is this, to assert that we must instantly begin all over again and begin at the other end. I begin with a little girl's hair. That, I know, is a good thing at any rate. If other things are against it, other things must go down. If landlords and laws and sciences are against landlords and laws and sciences must go down. With the red hair of one she-urchin in the gutter, I will set fire to all modern civilization. Because a girl should have long hair, she should have clean hair. Because she should have clean hair, she should not have an unclean home. Because she should not have an unclean home, she should have a free and leisured mother. Because she should have a free mother, she should not have an usurious landlord. Because there should not be an usurious landlord, there should be a redistribution of property. Because there should be a redistribution of property, there shall be a revolution. That little urchin with the gold red hair, whom I have just watched toddling past my house, she shall not be lopped and lamed and altered. Her hair shall not be cut short like a convict's. No, all the kingdoms of the earth shall be hacked about and mutilated to suit her. She is the human and sacred image. All around her the social fabric shall sway and split and fall. The pillars of society shall be shaken, and the roofs of ages come rushing down, and not one hair of her head shall be harmed. Man, that's great. It's just Great rhetoric, brings tears to my eyes. But basically, yeah, his point is that there is there's discrimination between the capitalist class and the sort of class that's in poverty. So if you remember going back to that sort of closed economy thing that I was talking about earlier, that he was talking about, where capitalism is self-defeating, or at least according to Chesterton. Yeah, that's. I'm not going to spoil it by trying to put it in other words because that was just you can't you can't put it any better than he just did what the point that he was trying to make. So I'm just gonna if you want to listen to that again, listen to that again. I can't follow that up. So let's just move on to the next section. All right, so this is sort of like the transition to the second sort of main component of distributism, the servile state. And this is Chesterton's and I think Belloc. I think we get some, but no, just Chesterton. Chesterton's, again, he brings in Hudge and Gudge. Chesterton's position that capitalism eventually leads to servility, the servile state, which we will get into a little later. Um, Sorry, I know it's been like almost half an hour, but I got to read this because, again, just amazing rhetoric um, from What's Wrong with the World. In the quarrel earlier alluded to between the energetic progressive and the obstinate conservative, or, to talk a tenderer language, between Hudge and Gudge, the state of cross purposes is at the present moment acute. The Tory says he wants to preserve family life in Cindertown. The Socialist very reasonably points out to him that in Cindertown at present there isn't any family life to preserve. But Hudge, the Socialist in his turn, is highly vague and mysterious about whether he would preserve the family life if there were any, or whether he will try to restore it where it has disappeared. It is all very confusing. The question we all want to ask of both of them is the original ideal question. Do you want to keep the family at all? Page 188, What's Wrong with the World? And then a follow-up on Hudge and Gudge. I will whisper in the reader's ear a horrible suspicion that has sometimes haunted me. The suspicion that Hudge and Gudge are secretly in partnership. That the quarrel they keep up in public is very much of a put-up job, and that the way in which they perpetually play into each other's hands is not an everlasting coincidence. Gudge, the plutocrat, wants an anarchic industrialism. Hudge, the idealist, provides him with lyric praises of anarchy. Gudge wants women workers because they are cheaper. Hudge calls the woman's work freedom to live her own life. Oh boy, this is getting spicy. Gudge wants steady and obedient workmen. Hudge preaches teetotalism to workmen, not to Gudge. Gudge wants a tame and timid population who will never take arms against tyranny. Hudge proves from Tolstoy that nobody must take arms against anything. Gudge is naturally a healthy and well-washed gentleman. Hudge earnestly preaches the perfection of Gudge's washing to people who can't practice it. Above all, Gudge rules by a coarse and cruel system of satin and sweating and bisexual toil, which is totally inconsistent with the free family and which is bound to destroy it. Therefore, Hudge, stretching out his arms to the universe with a prophetic smile, tells us that the family is something that we shall soon gloriously outgrow. I do not know whether the partnership of Hudge and Gudge is conscious or unconscious. I only know that between them they still keep the common man homeless. I only know I still meet Jones walking the streets in the grey twilight, looking sadly at the poles and barriers and low red goblin lanterns which still guard the house, which is none the less his because he has never been in it. Yeah, so I'm going to get into this idea that the capitalist and socialist class are secretly in partnership. I'm going to evaluate the statement. I'm not saying it's one way or the other, but I'm definitely going to be taking a pretty deep dive into that when I go into the opinion video for distributism, because Hayek, who is an Austrian economist, had some pretty interesting things to say, as does Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, who is also an Austrian economist. But that is not distributism. That is a separate thing. So we will move on. All right. All right. The servile state. All right. So this kind of goes back to I think this is Chesterton here. Yeah. So this kind of goes back to what Chesterton was just saying in the quote that I read to you guys, which is that capitalists benefit from socialist practices, and socialists benefit from capitalist practices. But specifically here, the idea that capitalists want socialism. So this is a pretty fundamental idea to distributism. Is this idea that capitalism develops into socialism, and that capitalists welcome socialism under certain conditions because capitalism itself is an unstable system, which, yeah, I'm not saying I necessarily agree or disagree with that, but that is sort of like the linchpin of this whole argument to distributism is that capitalism sort of develops into socialism, or develops into socialist practices are inevitable given capitalism, but this leads to a third system called the servile state, which is neither capitalist nor socialist, but which is the inevitable result of socialist practices, inevitable result of capitalism um, uh, sort of using socialist practices. So the idea that capitalists want socialism. Yeah, so I'm not going to read all of this, just some of this. This is from Utopia the User, written in 1917 by Chesterton. The chief aim of all honest socialists just now is to prevent the coming of socialism. We must note first of all the general truth about the curious time we live in. It will not be so difficult as some people may suppose to make the servile state look rather like socialism, especially to the more pedantic kind of socialists. The reason is this: the old, lucid, and trenchant expounder of socialism always describes the economic power of the plutocrats as consisting in private property. The rich man today does not only rule by using private property, he also rules by treating public property as if it were private property. Now, by following this precedent, this unprincipled vagueness about official and unofficial moneys, by the cheerful habit of always mixing up the money in the pocket with the money in the till, it would be quite possible to keep the rich as ever in practice, though they might have suffered confiscation in theory. Such is the society I think they will build, unless we can knock it down as fast as they build it. Yeah, that's kind of like the essence of this. One of the essential tenets of distributism is that capitalists um, want socialist practices because it makes them richer. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the definition of the servile state, and this is going to be pretty much entirely Belloc. This is from Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State, written in 1912. And yeah, this is a really interesting idea. And he uses kind of Marxian terms here, like proletariat. And it is sort of like it is similar to a Marxian analysis, but it's different because, while Marx would say that collectivism, or like the public ownership of property completely, is the inevitable result of capitalism, Belloc says that there's actually an alternative to that, which is the inevitable result of capitalism. Um, but they both kind of agree that capitalism is unstable and that there is a sort of proletariat. Remember, the proletariat is sort of like the the low income wage earners that we talked about earlier, that kind of make up this sort of that make the bread and butter for the capitalists. They are the bread and butter for the capitalists in a way. So let's examine three different definitions for the servile state that Belloc presents. I think they're all pretty much the same. So I'm just going to read them all to hammer this point home. From the Servile State, page 3. The subject of this book is written to maintain and prove the following truth: that our free modern society, in which the means of production are owned by a few, being necessarily an unstable equilibrium, it is tending to reach a condition of stable equilibrium by the establishment of compulsory labor legally enforceable upon those who do not own the means of production for the advantage of those who do. Another definition: to such a stable society I shall give, for reasons which shall be described in the next section, the title of the Servile State. So this is the servile state: the establishment of compulsory labor legally enforceable upon those who do not own the means of production for the advantage of those who do. What does this mean? This means that the capitalists who own the capitalist class that sort of owns the means of production is able to force the proletariat, or the low income wage earners, to or basically everyone who doesn't own the means of production, to work for them for a wage, and they are compelled to do this. It is kind of like he calls it the servile state because it is analogous to slavery, and as we will see, the reason why this is possible is because um, as the government buys up different, becomes more socialist, supposedly, by buying out different capitalists and taking over their um, business, the capitalists are able to sell the business to the state and ask for a premium in return, and they still get to manage the company. It's just kind of with a different label under the government, and then the government, in its turn, then compels laborers to work for the capitalists in order to keep the system running. Um, yeah. So one more definition. The definition of servile state is as follows: that arrangement of society in which so considerable a number of the families and individuals are constrained by positive law to labor for the advantage of other families and individuals as to stamp the whole community with the mark of such labor we call the servile state. All right, so that's the definition of the servile state. And now we're going to go into sort of a history of slavery. That this is Belloc in Servile State. Here we go. The immemorial past of Europe is a servile past. During some centuries which the Church raised, permeated, and constructed, Europe was gradually released or divorced from this immemorial and fundamental conception of slavery. To that conception, to that institution, our industrial or capitalist society is now upon its return. We are reestablishing the slave. So this is his thesis of sort of the history of Europe, specifically Britain. And I think he also includes Germany as one that is sort of tending back towards this idea of the servile state. But basically, his thesis is that slavery existed in the ancient world for a very long time. It was accepted practice, and although Christianity had no explicit tenets against slavery, slavery disappeared gradually until, because of the church, until in the Middle Ages, it was gone completely, and people were free, politically free and economically free. And then not the Industrial Revolution, the Reformation, specifically in England, which transferred basically King Henry VIII. This is 16th century, early 16th century. He confiscated the monasteries when he broke from Rome. He confiscated the monasteries, which was like, what was it? I can't remember, like 30% or something of the entire 20 to 30% of the entire economy, means of production, basically. He confiscated that and gave it to a bunch of the aristocrats. And the aristocrats, this is sort of the beginning of the capitalist class forming and the proletariat class forming. And this tension has sort of evolved throughout the centuries until we are back again, returning to the servile state. Partially because according to Belloc, partially because we've neglected Christianity. We have gone away from Christianity, but also because of this confiscation of property, which allowed the aristocrats to basically impose their will upon the government and the rest of the people in order to impose capitalist practices. Yeah. So, I think that was a pretty good summary of this section. So there's a lot of history there that you can read. I would highly recommend reading The Servile State if you are interested. That's the one book I would focus on because Chesterton is a little bit all over the place, but Belloc presents it in a very clear and concise way, what he's saying. And we'll evaluate it in the next video. Okay, so there and back again. History of slavery is now going to give way to the instability of capitalism. So, upon the creation of this capitalist class over this proletariat class in the 16th century in England, Belloc, in looking at it, observes two things. And this goes back to the definition of capitalism that from the very beginning of this video, the definition of capitalism that we got into, that it is a system where men are politically free but not economically free. and that, according to Belloc, is why capitalism is unstable, for these two, basically hinging upon these two reasons. Okay, here we go. So, its positive law will be divided into two sets. The first, economically free and politically free, this is the capitalist class, possessed of the means of production and securely confirmed in that possession. The second, economically unfree and politically unfree, but at first secured by their very lack of freedom in certain necessities of life, and in a minimum of well-being beneath which they shall not fall. That was page 3. And then he argues that this system cannot last for two reasons. Page 82. A society thus constituted cannot endure because it is subject to two very severe strains. Strains which increase in severity in proportion as that society becomes more thoroughly capitalist. The first of these strains, this is very important, rises from the divergence between the moral theories upon which the state reposes and the social facts which those moral theories attempt to govern. So there's a cognitive dissonance between what people actually do and what they believe. The second strain arises from the insecurity to which capitalism condemns the great mass of society and the general character of anxiety and peril which it imposes upon all citizens, but in particular upon the majority, which consists under capitalism of dispossessed free men. Now he goes on to develop this more. So point number 1, the fact that people are politically free but not economically free. This moral strain, therefore, arising from the divergence between what our laws and moral phrases pretend and what our society actually is, makes of that society an utterly unstable thing. Then the second one, the second strain which we have noted in capitalism, its second element of instability, consists in the fact that capitalism destroys security. So those are the two reasons why capitalism is unstable and not in equilibrium, and it will tend towards the servile state. As a matter of fact, where few possess the means of production, perfectly free political conditions are impossible. A perfect capitalist state cannot exist, though we have come nearer to it in modern England than other and more fortunate nations had thought possible. In the perfect capitalist state, there would be no food available for the non-owner save when he was actually engaged in production, and that absurdity would, by quickly ending all human lives, save those of the owners, put a term to the arrangement. If you left men completely free under a capitalist system, there would be so heavy a mortality from starvation as to dry up the sources of labor in a very short time. And then Chesterton is a good quote from Utopia of Users, 1917. It might be possible to keep a supply of strong and healthy slaves without coddling them with decent conditions. Basically, under capitalism, they want to maximize profits, and to do that, they will take all of the surplus value produced by the workers up down until the wage, they will drive down the wage that they're paying the workers to the maximum extent that they can in order to produce profits, and this would destroy them supposedly. I don't necessarily agree with this, but that is for another video. So that is reason number 1 why free political conditions are impossible, because capitalism tends toward making people unfree. And then the second one is the reason why the reason why capitalism destroys security, which is the second reason why capitalism is stable, is because of this. If the full formula of capitalism were accepted by our courts and our executive statesmen, anyone could start a rival business, undersell those trusts, and shatter the comparative security they afford to industry within their field. Under the essential conditions of capitalism, under a perfect political freedom, such conspiracies would be punished by the courts for what they are, to wit, a contravention of the fundamental doctrine of political liberty. So, that actually kind of goes back to the first point. So this idea that monopolies are going to dominate society and not allow their profits to be undercut by new entrants into the market. Okay, I don't know if I explained that very well, but check out the book, because those two reasons. If those two reasons are not true, let's just say if those two reasons are not true, Belloc's argument falls apart, because that means capitalism is actually in equilibrium and not tending towards the servile state. That doesn't mean Chesterton's argument necessarily falls apart, but it would be a major blow to Belloc's. All right, so now we get into what capitalism is going to turn into because of these two tendencies. Um, there are but three social arrangements which can replace capitalism: slavery, socialism, and property. And I'm not going to read all of this. I'm just going to say, so he argues that socialism not possible because if you truly like confiscated everyone, all the capitalists' means of production, they would just wouldn't stand for that. So it might happen in theory, but in practice, it would never happen. Um, Property, which is distributism's solution, is the idea that um, the means of production would be distributed to a larger amount of people, and that would alleviate the tension latent in capitalism. And then finally, the third is slavery, which is the system that servile state that he is arguing that capitalism will turn into. Um, yeah, let me just look at all these quotes here. All right, yeah, I'll read this because this is a good summary. Page 144, the servile state, and I actually just realized I'm not using the page numbers from this book. I was using the page numbers online, so I used the links in Wikipedia to all the four books and read them all online. So if you want to check those out, that would be the easiest way to find these quotes. This is page 144 in the servile state. All forces then are making for the servile state in this, the final phase of our evil capitalist society in England. The generous reformer is tantalized towards it. The ungenerous one finds it a very mirror of his ideal. The herd of practical men meet at every stage in its inception the practical, air quotes, steps which they expected and demanded, while the proletarian mass, upon whom the experiment is being tried, have lost the tradition of property and of freedom, which might resist the change, and are most powerfully inclined to its acceptance by the positive benefits which it confers. Um, Sorry, just a second here. All right, so that is why he argues that capitalism will be replaced by the servile state. And then he goes into a bunch of like practical reasons why servile state is actually happening in Britain or was happening in Britain at the time. I'm not going to go into those. I might go into those in my opinion piece. All right, so this leads us to the next section, and I might, if I decide to cut the video here, then this will be the end of the first introduction and the beginning of the second introduction. Thank you all for watching. All right, redistributism. So this is the first part of this is the solution that Chesterton and, well, mainly Chesterton proposes for the concentration of means of production in the capitalist class. And this goes back to Belloc's argument on the history of slavery. So if you don't remember that from the servile state section, I would recommend going back. Basically, it's this idea that when King Henry VIII confiscated the monasteries in the 16th century and gave it to the aristocracy, this was a ill-gotten gains. These were ill-gotten gains and should be returned to the worker. That's basically the argument that Chesterton's going to promote here, I think. Yeah. Um, yeah. Thus, the future of which we spoke at the beginning has, in England at least, always been the alley of tyranny. This is Chesterton, pages 58 to 59, What's Wrong with the World. Um, the ordinary Englishman has been duped out of his old possessions, such as they were, and always in the name of progress. Such an apologue is literally no exaggeration of the facts of English history. The rich did literally turn out the poor of the old guest house onto the road, briefly telling them that it was the road to progress. They did literally force them into factories in the modern wage slavery, assuring them all the time that this was the only way to help wealth and civilization. So yeah, just this idea that it wasn't fair, that what happened, and because it wasn't fair, Chesterton argues that this means of production should be confiscated back from capitalists about 500 years later and given to redistributed to the masses. Um, if we are to save property, we must distribute property almost as sternly and sweepingly as did the French Revolution. Um, Here it may be said, my book ends where it ought to begin. I have said that the strong centers of modern English property must swiftly or slowly be broken up, if even the idea of property is to remain among the Englishmen. There are two ways in which it could be done: a cold administration by quite detached officials, which is called collectivism, or personal distribution, so as to produce what is called peasant proprietorship. Um, so I forgot to look that up. I don't actually know what that means, but um, I think basically it there are various ways you could redistribute the means of production that wouldn't involve like whole scale confiscation, but it would involve confiscation of some sort or another. Here we go. Okay, this is from the Utopia of Users. If I vote for confiscating some usurer's millions, I am doing, they say, precisely what I should be doing if I took pennies out of a blind man's hat. They are both denials of the principle of private property, and are equally right and equally wrong, according to our view of that principle. I should find a great many distinctions to draw in such a matter. First, I should say that taking usurer's money by proper authority is not robbery, but recovery of stolen goods. Second, I should say that even if there were no such thing as personal property, there would still be such a thing as personal dignity, and different modes of robbery would diminish it in very different ways. Similarly, there is the truth, but only a half-truth, in the saying that all modern powers alike rely on the capitalist and make war on the lines of capitalism. It is true and it is disgraceful. So I'll read this small section again. First, I should say that taking users' money by the proper authority is not robbery, but recovery of stolen goods. That's a pretty bold claim. Not one that I necessarily agree with, but yeah, that's sort of his idea that just it was confiscated in the 16th century, and it was used to oppress the masses throughout the intervening 500 years, and it should be taken back and given to the masses, specifically property, means of production. This is kind of the thing that I will critique, but I'm not exactly sure like how whether Chesterton and Belloc equate property with means of production, because maybe in their time, property like having physical land could help help produce something. Like you have cows and you have pasture or sheep or whatever, and you're able to use that, sell the produce from that to subsist on. But in today's society, I think means of production could mean like a latte machine from Starbucks, which costs like $100,000 or more than that, or like a plane or something. And this is not like physical landed property means of production. But no, it's not physical land property. But it is means of production. And so they're kind of two very different things in our society today. So not really sure how Chesterton and Belloc would approach that, but I think they're using property and means of production kind of interchangeably here, which is kind of tough to tough to sift through. Okay, so that is their idea of redistributism. Sorry, I went from liberté, égalité, fraternité. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Into the introduction rather than back to the regular scene, but that's okay. This is just a fun little section. I thought it very interesting that Chesterton and Belloc sort of idealized the French Revolution, which I definitely don't. So, and but it feeds their love of democracy. So they're very into, or at least Chesterton is very favorable of democracy and sort of of all that entails, which is why he kind of looks back favorably on the French Revolution. He doesn't embrace it wholesale, but it is still interesting. Um, Here we go. A cultured conservative friend of mine once exhibited great distress because in a gay moment I once called that is a different meaning of gay than it now means. I once called Edmund Burke an atheist. Burke was certainly not an atheist in his conscious cosmic theory, Burke did stand for the atheistic attitude and mode of argument, as Robespierre stood for the theistic. There we go, kind of the praise of the French of Robespierre a little bit. The revolution appeals to the idea of an abstract and eternal justice beyond all local custom or convenience. If there are commands of God, then there must be rights of man. Here Burke made his brilliant diversion. He did not attack the Robespierre doctrine with the old medieval doctrine of jus divinum. He attacked it with the modern argument of scientific relativity. In short, the argument of evolution. He suggested that humanity was everywhere molded by or fitted to its environment and institutions, in fact, that each people practically got not only the tyrant it deserved, but the tyrant it ought to have. I know nothing of the rights of men, he said, but I know something of the rights of Englishmen. There you have the essential atheist. His argument is that we have got some protection by natural accident and growth, and why should we profess to think beyond it for all the world as if we were the images of God? Man, said Burke in effect, must adapt himself to everything like an animal. He must not try to alter everything like an angel. So, yeah, kind of critiquing the Burke counter wow, I'm sorry, counter Enlightenment figure, very famous counter Enlightenment figure from the in England in this late 18th century, as the French Revolution is going on. But I think he has an interesting point here that um, people are not merely animals, that passive animals responding passively to the environment. They can alter the environment like angels, and they are equal across all countries and cultures, which means that there are um, rights rights for everyone, and not merely for. There is an objective reality about all men, not merely about some men. Like it's not like sheep's in England versus. It's not like Englishmen are sheeps and Frenchmen are cows. Like we're both the same in the same genus and genus in the same species and have similar rights and duties and responsibilities as a result. I think that's kind of the point he's trying to make there. Okay. Now, after that side diversion, we get to sort of the ideal that Chesterton and Belloc want. And this is the last section, 3 acres and a cow. All right. So this comes from that famous phrase, if you heard earlier. I'll actually try to go back up and, oh, this is a bad idea. I got like 13 pages of quotes here. So I think it's like near the top. Uh, oh crap. Yeah, shoot, I'm not finding it. That's okay. But basically, this idea of the 3 acres and a cow, that every man should have land and means of production, property and means of production in sufficient quantity. It's called, this subsection is called the desideratum, sort of like the utopia ideal that Chesterton wants here, and what's wrong with the world. Um, Now, I take, as I said, this small human omnipotence, this possession of a definite cell or chamber of liberty, as the working model for the present inquiry. Whether we can give every Englishman a free home of his own or not, at least we should desire it, and he desires it. Page 49, What's Wrong with the World? Page 50, What's Wrong with the World? I take then this one institution as a test. As every normal man desires a woman, and children born of a woman, every normal man desires a house of his own to put them into. He does not merely want a roof above him and a chair below him. He wants an objective and visible kingdom. This is the normal appetite of men. I do not say that there are not exceptions. To give nearly everybody ordinary houses would please nearly everybody. That is what I assert without apology. Now in this modern England, as you eagerly point out, it is very difficult to give nearly everybody houses. Quite so, I merely set up the desideratum. And then this is a good line here, sort of moving away his idea that we shouldn't be trying to maximize profits, we should be trying to maximize the happiness of men. If we make men happier, it does not matter if we make them poorer. It does not matter if we make them less productive. It does not matter if we make them less progressive, in the sense of merely changing their life without increasing their liking for it. This is from the Outline of Sanity, written 1927, page 165. Um, yeah, so that is sort of what the 3 acres and a cow idea. Um, all right, and then he has some other schemes here for how to redistribute, which I'm not going to go over. All right, I think that's pretty much it. So in conclusion, we have distributism is made up of um, 5 essential components. The first is a virulent, very virulent, at least on the part of Chesterton, uh, anti-capitalist position that where capitalism is defined as by Belloc as a system where men are politically free but not economically free because a few men own the means of production and not the majority. And this, he argues, leads to the servile state, which is the second idea, sort of second very big main component of this of distributism. That because men are politically unfree and economically free, there's a moral strain, a cognitive dissonance between what people believe and what people actually do that needs to be resolved. And there is a um, shoot, I'm trying to remember here. Servile state, economically unfree, and there is the counter pressure of the capitalist um, wanting to basically exploit his worker for as much as he possibly can. Um, these two reasons for disequilibrium leads to the formation of the servile state, which I'm just going to go back up, which he which Belloc defines as the establishment of compulsory labor legally enforceable upon those who do not own the means of production for the advantage of those who do. Sort of like state enforced slavery of the proletariat by the capitalist class. The third main sort of idea here is this liberté, égalité, fraternité, this idea that democracy, that giving the people what they want is uh, the rights of men is important, is what is important, and not maximizing. Yeah, that is what is important, and not we should be thinking of ourselves as animals who cannot change the environment, but as angels who can. Then the fourth is the um, sorry that yeah. Then the fourth is, so I actually mixed that up. That was supposed to be the fourth. The third one is redistributism, but it doesn't really matter. So the third is redistributism, which is their idea for um, fixing the current capitalist system, basically confiscating the means of production from the capitalist class and giving them to a certain quantity and giving them to the masses in order to allow them to subsist on something without having to be forced to work for a wage, as a drowning man is forced to become the bodily slave of someone who throws him the rope, of a capitalist who throws him the rope. Finally, the fifth is 3 acres and a cow. This is the desideratum that Chesterton sets up. He wants everyone to have some sort of ownership of the means of production, as well as um, physical property to live on and take care of. Okay, I think that is pretty much it. Got this done in about an hour. I'm not sure if I'll split it up into 2 separate videos, but thank you guys for watching, and I will make a second video sort of critiquing distributism, because there's some very interesting and I think insightful things that Chesterton and Belloc both point out, but I think there are also some pretty major flaws in their thinking. But like St. Thomas Aquinas, I'm just going to try to present the strongest case for distributism I possibly can in this video, the most accurate, and not attack a straw man. All right, thank you guys for watching, and as Belloc said at the end of the Serval State, Videat Deus, may you see God.